Welcome to the As I Found It video blog series. This is number 1. I'm Dennis Nichols, photographer, geologist, philosopher, and your host for today. Not only is this the first video blog, but it is also the first article in a series called Patterns and Patterns. If you want to examine the images being discussed in greater detail, I suggest the old-fashioned text and image block. Welcome to my photo studio and geoscience office. They are directly behind the photographer. That's me. The real darkroom is behind the wall on the right, and the digital darkroom on the left. The 12-foot high column of glass blocks forms a pillar of light in the morning at this time of the year. That wall faces east, but given Calgary's latitude and the presence of other buildings on the east side, it is only from late March that the morning light gives this light pillar effect. That is why I made the snapshot. In previous essays, I have mentioned some of the philosophical aspects of viewing, understanding, and ultimately appreciating visual art. In previous essays, I have mentioned some of the philosophical aspects of viewing, understanding, and ultimately appreciating visual art. Many writers, and I am no exception, treat our mind's eye with cavalier offhandedness. Largely, I think this is a result of having some understanding, perhaps based more on experience than learning. I was examining some of my latest images for inclusion on the AIFI, and this series struck me. Being made in a portrait format, the images needed to be turned to appear normal, or appear as the brain expects them to be. I have been doing this for so long now, unless I intend to use it for display to others, I often don't bother changing the orientation. When using an enlarger in a real darkroom, one was often required to turn or reorient the easel. Some enlargers allowing for changes in orientation of the negative, but not many. It was much easier to reorient the body and the head of the photographer. After a while, you don't bother. In this second image, you can see everything is the same and everything is different. Our brain struggles to make sense of things. Once the on its side orientation is realized, the struggling stops. It is recognized for what it is and accepted. Until that time, the image tends to draw our attention. We struggle to understand what is normal, and in our mind's eye, correct it. The doorknob and the ceiling fan are the major clues. In this next image, I covered some of those most obvious clues. I did not try to do this as to fool the viewer. I assure you my retouching skills are much better than this. My purpose was to illustrate that the removal of obvious clues, even poorly done, makes it more difficult. The viewing perspective is often as important as the cameras or the photographers. Odd angles and out-of-ordinary views and viewpoints often make the ordinary more interesting and sometimes extraordinary. This is one reason you will often find several shots of the same thing or place at AIFI. My take on normal and yours may well be quite different. If the technical qualities are equal, then it is only the lighting and the viewing perspective that attracts one person to one and a different person to another. Orientation aside, this image is stuffed with patterns, the subject of this essay, of course. The glass blocks are squares 8 inches on a side, assembled in a regular pattern of two side by side, and on a horizontal or perhaps vertical plane, they form a rectangular figure with repeated pattern of 17 ranks by 2. Almost every other figure is a rectangle or a parallelogram. These figures are sometimes composed of other figures, such as the glass blocks or the struts of the railings. Other times not. If one looks closely at the glass blocks, one sees that they are composed of small parallel prisms, placed horizontally on one side and vertically on the other. This gives the impression of little squares. Those little squares, of course, give way to long rectangles or parallelograms depending on one's focal length. Buildings from the late 20th century is very often filled with geometric figures or impressions of them. The micro patterns are very often reflected in the macro patterns, and the macro images of the glass block is a case in point. It is composed of parallel stripes of one orientation on one side and the opposite orientation on the other. Patterns and patterns will be a continuing theme, one we will return to from time to time here at the As I Found It blog. Good day.